Before it was the ultimate symbol of global wealth and high fashion, it was just the last name of a penniless Italian dishwasher who spent his days hauling the heavy trunks of the rich. Have you ever looked at a luxury storefront, gleaming with gold, and wondered what it took to build it? Did it start with a massive inheritance? Or a royal decree? For most, yes. But Guccio was different. Today, it's an unstoppable luxury empire valued at over $18 billion. But its foundation was built on empty pockets and stolen glimpses of high society. Picture this. It is the late 19th century. The world is rapidly industrializing. The wealthy are traveling across borders, and inside the opulent lobby of London's Savoy Hotel, a young, invisible boy from Florence stands in the shadows. He isn't there as a wealthy guest. He is there to serve. Every day he watches the world's most powerful people aristocrats, titans of industry, kings and queens, parade through the grand doors. What does he notice? It isn't their tailored clothes. It isn't their sparkling jewelry. It is their luggage. Heavy, magnificent, meticulously crafted leather trunks that silently scream power and prestige. In those moments, carrying bags that cost more than he would ever make in a lifetime, a dangerous idea took root in his mind. What if he didn't just carry the bags of the elite? What if he created the very items they worshipped? It was an impossible dream for a boy wiping tables in the scullery. How could a nobody, armed with absolutely nothing but quiet observation, conquer the gated, notoriously snobbish world of elite fashion? It would require breaking every rule. It would require a terrifying leap of faith. And it would exact a brutal toll on everyone who shared his blood. Because the journey from the scullery of a London hotel to the absolute pinnacle of luxury is a dark, thrilling story of fierce ambition, a desperate gamble, and a vicious family blood feud that almost destroyed it all. This is the untold story of Guccio, the man who looked at an impossible gap between himself and the elite and decided to bridge it with pure Italian defiance. Are you ready to see how a simple dishwasher built an $18 billion empire? Florence, Italy. The year is 1881, a city legendary for breathtaking Renaissance art, towering architecture, and historic connection to unparalleled craftsmanship. But for the family into which our protagonist was born, the romanticized streets of Florence offered no comfort, wealth, or promises. Guccio was born into a struggling family of leather craftsmen. Surrounded by the finest art in the world, they were crippled by grinding, relentless poverty. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of being surrounded by abundance while your pockets are empty? That was the reality for the young Italian boy. Every single day, he watched artisans create masterpieces for the wealthy, while his family fought to keep food on the table. It was a brutal paradox. The air smelled of rich leather, but reality tasted of desperation. He knew that staying in the shadows of the magnificent Duomo meant inheriting his father's bleak poverty forever. He refused. He needed to escape. So, in the late 1890s, as the world teetered on the edge of a new century, a teenage Guccio made a desperate decision. He fled his grim prospects. Packing his meager belongings, he left his sun-drenched homeland for the cold, fog-choked metropolis of London, England. Arriving with no money, connections, or formal education, he was just another immigrant swallowed by the massive industrial machine of the Victorian era. But he was determined to carve out a space for himself. He landed the job at a place standing in stark contrast to his own existence, working as a dishwasher and bellhop at the world-famous Savoy Hotel. The Savoy was not just a hotel. It was a glittering palace of unimaginable luxury, the beating heart of high society, and a fortress of the global elite. Inside the grand halls of the Savoy, the contrast between Guccio's life and the guests was violently extreme. He spent days in the sweltering scullery, his hands cracked and blistered from washing the fine china of the rich. When he wasn't scrubbing plates, he was hauling luggage in the intimidating lobby. He was a ghost in a sharply tailored uniform, an invisible servant navigating a world of kings, aristocrats, and early titans of industry. Can you imagine the stinging humiliation? To be treated as part of the furniture while the most powerful people on earth paraded past, completely oblivious to your existence? For most young men in his position, this daily indignity would breed toxic bitterness. It would crush their spirit and relegate them to a lifetime of quiet, resentful servitude. But Guccio was different. Where others saw oppression, Guccio saw an elite education. He realized the Savoy Hotel was the greatest university in the world for understanding the psychology of the ultra-wealthy. He spent his youth silently observing the elite. He watched exactly how they moved, spoke, and most importantly, what they carried. He became fiercely obsessed with their magnificent leather travel trunks. These were not mere containers for clothes. They were absolute status symbols. Exquisitely crafted works of art from legendary makers. They signaled wealth, power, and historic heritage before the owner even spoke a single word. He noticed the heavy brass hardware, the perfect hand stitching, the intoxicating smell of premium hides. He wasn't just carrying bags, he was dissecting them. He was studying them. Every single time he hoisted a heavy trunk onto a brass cart, he mapped out its complex construction in his sharp mind. A burning desire began to completely consume him. He did not just want to serve the elite. He wanted to command their respect. He wanted to create the very items they worship so blindly. The stinging humiliation of his poverty transformed into a relentless, terrifying ambition. He saw that the wealthy were obsessed with exclusivity and flawless craftsmanship, the very things his native Florence was famous for. The irony was not lost on him. English lords and wealthy tycoons were paying fortunes for leather goods, while brilliant craftsmen in his homeland starved in dirty streets. He began to understand the mechanics of prestige. He saw that luxury was not just about physical material. It was about the story, the aura, and the feeling of superiority it granted the owner. He realized if he could combine the unparalleled skill of Florentine artisans with the refined tastes of the Savoy's clientele, he could create something the world had never seen. Year after agonizing year, he absorbed this hidden knowledge. He was a silent spy inside the opulent house of the rich. He cataloged the subtle details separating a good bag from a truly legendary one. He noted the exact preferences of Russian princesses and American oil barons. He learned that true luxury required a complete rejection of compromise. It had to be bold. It had to be perfect. But how could a lowly dishwasher ever execute such a grand, impossible vision? How could a man sleeping in a cramped, freezing servant's quarter launch a brand to rival the established heritage houses of Europe? The gap between his current reality and his ultimate vision was astronomical. It was the exact kind of dream that drives ordinary men mad. Yet he held on to it with a fierce ferocity, defying all logic. He was no longer just a poor boy from Italy. He was a man armed with the most dangerous weapon in business, highly guarded insider knowledge. He had spent long, grueling years gathering priceless intelligence. He successfully decoded the precise, deeply hidden desires of all the world's most demanding luxury consumers. The time for quiet observation was finally over. The time for quiet observation was rapidly approaching. But leaving the steady employment of the Grand Savoy Hotel meant returning directly to the terrifying poverty he had fought so hard to escape. It meant walking away from the only security he knew. Guccio had memorized the exact dimensions, materials, and aura of the world's most expensive luggage. But as he boarded the long, slow train ride back to Italy, he faced a brutal, undeniable reality. He had the flawless blueprints in his head, but zero money in his pocket. He had cracked the secret code of what the rich truly desired. But returning to Italy with nothing but a fragile dream was not enough. He had to risk his entire life to make it real. The train ride back to Florence was not a victory lap. It was the terrifying return of a man who had seen the absolute top of the mountain but was still standing firmly at the bottom. Florence, in the difficult years following the First World War, was a broken city desperately trying to find its soul again. For Guccio, it was the ultimate proving ground. He had the grand vision. He had the insider knowledge. But knowledge without ruthless execution is just a hallucination. How do you build an exclusive empire for the elite when your own pockets are completely empty? You risk absolutely everything you have. In 1921, Guccio took his meager, hard-fought life savings, every single solitary lira he had scraped together wiping tables and hauling heavy trunks in London, and took a massive, heart-stopping gamble. He opened a small leather goods and saddle shop in his native Florence. Think about the sheer audacity of this defining moment. He was not backed by wealthy investors. He had no financial safety net. If this shop failed, he wouldn't just be poor, he would be utterly ruined, a laughingstock in the historic city of his birth. But Guccio was different. He understood that to capture the attention of the world's most discerning buyers, you couldn't just sell them a physical product. You had to sell them a piece of their own superiority. His first shop was small, smelling strongly of raw hides, polished wood, and desperate ambition. He hired the finest Florentine craftsmen, men whose families had worked leather for generations, but who had been completely forgotten by the modernizing world. He demanded absolute perfection from every single worker. Every stitch had to be flawless. Every cut of leather had to rival the magnificent trunks he had once carried for kings at the Savoy. The gamble was terrifying. A high-stakes game played with his family's survival on the line. Have you ever put everything you own on a single, terrifying bet? That is exactly what he did. He poured his blood, his sweat, and his absolute obsession into the foundations of that tiny shop. But there was a glaring problem. A profound, existential problem that could kill the business before it even took its first real breath. The elite did not buy products from peasants. They bought heritage. They bought lineage. And the name, Guccio? It sounded terribly common. It sounded exactly like the very scullery boy he was trying so desperately to leave behind forever. It lacked the heavy aristocratic weight his wealthy, sophisticated clients absolutely demanded. How do you convince a duke, an earl, or a powerful industrialist to part with their vast fortune for a bag made by a former dishwasher? You rewrite your own history. You create an irresistible, intoxicating myth. In a stroke of absolute marketing genius, he realized that Guccio alone would never command the respect of the London crowd he wanted to attract back to his store. So, he made a decision that would echo through the next century of high fashion. He boldly stamped his family surname, Gucci, into the premium leather. Gucci. It rolled off the tongue with a sharp, undeniable elegance. It sounded deeply established. It sounded outrageously expensive. He wasn't just stamping leather. He was violently stamping his dominance onto the industry. Eventually, this magnificent obsession with legacy would lead to the creation of the iconic interlocking GG logo. Two simple, perfectly symmetrical letters, crossing over one another, immortalizing his own initials as a crest of absolute luxury. He effectively turned his own name into a coat of arms. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and elite branding. By branding his items with this aristocratic crest, he made his customers feel like they belonged to an exclusive, highly guarded secret club. He gave them the aristocracy they craved, even if he had to invent it from thin air. The Florence shop slowly began to attract highly lucrative attention. Local aristocrats and incredibly wealthy international travelers visiting Italy heard whispers of a brilliant craftsman who understood English quality but delivered it with unparalleled Florentine soul. They initially came for the saddles. For centuries, the horse was the ultimate, undisputed symbol of vast wealth. If you controlled the equestrian gear, you controlled the elite. Guccio's saddles were true masterpieces, eagerly bought by the Italian nobility who paraded them proudly through the historic cobblestone streets. But the world was rapidly, violently changing. The loud mechanical roar of the internal combustion engine was beginning to permanently drown out the quiet clip-clop of horse hooves. The global elite were aggressively trading their prized thoroughbreds for fast, metallic automobiles. Most traditional leather makers clung desperately to the past, trying to sell saddles to a rapidly modernizing world that simply no longer needed them. They refused to adapt, anchored down by their own stubborn history. They were terrified of the future. But Guccio was different. He saw the terrifying writing on the wall. Recognizing the sharp, unavoidable decline of horse-drawn carriages, Guccio made a ruthless, highly calculated pivot. He shifted his entire operation from equestrian saddles to high-end travel luggage. He was directly targeting the new, fast-moving wave of automobile-driving aristocrats. He designed magnificent bags that fit perfectly into the cramped trunks of expensive early motor cars. He intelligently kept the beloved equestrian aesthetic, the shiny metal bits, the green and red webbed stripes inspired by saddle girths, the heavy, durable stitching, but applied it entirely to modern travel. It was pure, unadulterated genius. He gave the rich the comforting nostalgia of their aristocratic past, perfectly wrapped in the thrilling, dangerous speed of the modern future. The financial risk of this massive pivot was staggering. Abandoning his core product could have completely bankrupted him overnight. It went completely against everything the industry said. His competitors laughed at him, calling him a fool for abandoning the noble horse for dirty, oil-leaking machines. but he trusted his razor-sharp instincts over the comforting lies of tradition. Something happened that would change everything. The wealthy elite did not just accept his new luggage. They became completely obsessed with it. They bought his travel pieces not just for utility, but as powerful symbols of their own forward-thinking modernity. Every single piece of luggage leaving his small shop was a bold declaration of war against mediocrity. The elite travelers proudly displayed their new acquisitions in the grand lobbies of the very hotels that had once employed him as a nameless ghost. Can you picture the profound, overwhelming satisfaction he must have felt? The boy who once scrubbed the dirty plates of the rich was now the absolute dictator of their sophisticated tastes. He had achieved the truly impossible. He had successfully weaponized his own poverty, turning his years of silent, humiliating observation into a billion-dollar blueprint. His relentless, calculating ambition had paid off brilliantly. The foundation of a legendary, globe-spanning dynasty had been cemented in pure Florentine leather. Guccio had successfully transformed himself from a completely invisible servant hauling bags in London to the undisputed master of Italian luxury travel. He had built the bridge. He had won the gamble. The empire was rising. He was no longer just surviving. He was dictating the very rules of high society fashion. The interlocking G's were becoming a recognizable stamp of serious power across Europe. The wealth was pouring in, and the former dishwasher was finally sitting at the table with the kings he once served. The Gucci name was finally gaining terrifying momentum. But when a devastating global war threatened to wipe out his entire supply chain, Guccio had to make a choice: close the doors forever or break every rule in the fashion industry. By the 1930s, the Gucci name was whispered among the Italian elite. The business was thriving, expanding, and cementing its status as the premier destination for luxury travel goods. Aristocrats paraded his creations, and the small shop in Florence was transformed into a bustling hub of immense wealth. The former dishwasher from the Savoy Hotel was finally living the impossible dream. He had outsmarted the rigid class system of Europe. He had built an empire of leather and brass, fueled by his obsessive memory of the English nobility. His sons were joining the business, learning the dark art of crafting prestige. The future looked incredibly bright, a golden road paved with the highest quality Florentine hides. But just as Guccio tasted true success, Mussolini marched. The borders closed and the world went to war. Overnight, Gucci's leather supply vanished completely. The devastating reality of the Second World War shattered the global economy. The fascist regime in Italy faced crippling international embargoes. The luxurious, premium calfskins that Guccio relied upon to create his masterpieces were suddenly gone. They were confiscated for the brutal war effort, leaving the artisans of Florence with absolutely nothing to stitch in their quiet workshops now. How do you survive when the very foundation of your entire business is suddenly ripped away? Most luxury competitors completely halted their production lines. They locked their doors, surrendered to the terrifying economic collapse, and prayed for the war to simply end. They believed that without fine leather, luxury simply could not exist. It was a universally accepted truth in the industry. You cannot make a premium bag out of garbage. But Guccio was different. He absolutely refused to let a global war destroy his hard-earned empire. He was a survivor who had already conquered the crushing poverty of his childhood, and he would not be defeated by fascist embargoes. He realized that luxury was not just about the material itself. It was about the unparalleled craftsmanship and the undeniable prestige of the brand name. He forcefully rejected the rigid norm that luxury meant pure leather. He commanded his highly skilled artisans to experiment aggressively with cheap, completely unorthodox materials that were still available in war-torn Italy. They began weaving strong, durable fabrics from basic hemp, rugged linen, and tough jute. These were the cheap, dirty textiles used by poor farmers, not wealthy aristocrats. Yet he somehow transformed them forever. By printing the iconic repeating diamond pattern onto these cheap canvas materials, he magically elevated them. He created the first iteration of the famous canvas print that still dominates fashion today. He successfully proved that true luxury is an idea, not just an expensive animal hide. But the most incredible, jaw-dropping innovation was still yet to come. Even with the new canvas bags, they urgently needed strong handles. Traditional leather straps were completely impossible to source. Metal was heavily rationed for weapons and military vehicles. What could they possibly use that was strong enough to hold a heavily packed travel bag, yet elegant enough to bear the Gucci family name? The answer came from a deeply unexpected place. In 1947, acting purely out of desperate necessity, they imported cheap Japanese bamboo. It was extremely lightweight, incredibly durable, and completely ignored by the established fashion world. Have you ever tried to bend thick, solid wood without breaking it? It is extremely difficult. It requires intense heat, extreme patience, and brilliant engineering. He instructed his master craftsmen to carefully heat the stiff bamboo cane over open, burning flames, slowly and meticulously bending it into a perfect, graceful semicircle for the bag. This raw, totally unconventional material was then brilliantly polished, carefully lacquered, and firmly attached to a small, beautifully structured handbag. It was a completely wild, unprecedented design choice that flew violently against everything the industry said about traditional luxury. His rivals were absolutely horrified by this bizarre creation. They believed that attaching cheap bamboo to a luxury handbag was a vulgar insult to the high fashion establishment. They confidently predicted that the brand would immediately collapse in total disgrace. But they were all entirely wrong. The legendary 1947 bamboo bag became an instant, roaring sensation across the globe. By forcefully injecting exotic, unexpected materials into classic Italian design, Guccio had birthed a completely new category of modern luxury. He took the severe deprivations of a brutal war and magically spun them into absolute gold. The bamboo handle was not just a practical solution. It became a brilliant, shining symbol of Italian survival and defiant ingenuity. It boldly declared that true elegance cannot be contained by strict rules or material shortages. The business had not just survived the dark storm of the war. It emerged from the ashes stronger, bolder, and more universally recognized than ever before in its entire history. Then, as the 1950s dawned, something happened that would change everything. The brutal war had finally ended, and a massive wave of global wealth began washing over Europe once again. But it was not just the traditional European aristocrats returning to the sunny streets of Florence. A completely new, incredibly powerful kind of royalty had suddenly arrived on the scene: Hollywood. The booming American film industry began shooting massive, big-budget, epic movies in the historic streets of Rome. The enthusiastically dubbed this glamorous, intoxicating era, Hollywood on the Tiber. The biggest, most famous movie stars on the entire planet were suddenly roaming freely through Italy, looking for the ultimate symbols of European sophistication to bring back home. Naturally, international jet-setters, wealthy producers, and glamorous actors began swarming the Florence boutique in massive droves. They were completely mesmerized by the unparalleled craftsmanship, the daring bamboo designs, and the heavy aristocratic aura of the interlocking GG logo. They quickly realized that owning a piece of Gucci wasn't just about carrying expensive luggage anymore. It was a highly coveted passport to an exclusive, glamorous lifestyle. It was the absolute ultimate flex for the newly rich celebrities of the entire modern world today. The brand exploded onto the global stage with terrifying speed. Guccio had brilliantly recognized that high society was completely shifting. The old aristocrats were dying out, swiftly replaced by silver screen icons who wielded far more cultural influence than any aging European duke. He viciously capitalized on this monumental shift. When famous actresses were passionately photographed, fleeing from aggressive paparazzi on the romantic cobblestone streets of Rome, what were they desperately clutching in their hands? A Gucci bamboo bag. It was the greatest, most effective free advertising campaign in the entire history of modern fashion. The brand went strictly A-list, cementing its position at the absolute pinnacle of luxury. But they didn't just stop at luggage and handbags. The fiercely ambitious family aggressively expanded their offerings into ready-to-wear clothing, fine shoes, and breathtaking accessories. They relentlessly dominated every single aspect of the luxury market, leaving their slow, traditional competitors choking on their dust. Do you see the absolute brilliance of this strategy? They were selling an entire, cohesive universe of wealth, meticulously designed to make anyone who entered their doors feel like flawless royalty. And soon, actual, literal royalty would come aggressively knocking on their iconic front door right now. In the swinging 1960s, the brand achieved a level of cultural dominance that no other luxury house could even fathom. It was no longer just a store. It was a mandatory pilgrimage for the global elite. When Her Serene Highness, Princess Grace of Monaco, one of the most famous, universally adored women on the face of the earth, walked into the Milan boutique, She demanded something extraordinary. She wanted a scarf, but she didn't want just any common scarf off the shelf. She demanded a masterpiece. Guccio's son, Rodolfo, who had taken a commanding role in the booming business, immediately commissioned a legendary Italian illustrator to create a completely bespoke, impossibly beautiful design just for her. The result was the legendary Florence silk scarf, a breathtakingly complex pattern featuring 43 distinct varieties of flowers and plants, bursting with vibrant, intoxicating colors. It was a staggering work of art that instantly became synonymous with her ethereal beauty. The intense global reaction was absolutely explosive. Every single wealthy woman on the planet desperately wanted to drape themselves in the exact same delicate silk that kissed the graceful neck of Princess Grace of Monaco herself in this exact moment right here now. This exclusive royal connection completely solidified the brand as the undisputed king of high fashion accessories. But the absolute peak of their cultural impact was still yet to arrive. Across the Atlantic Ocean, America was fiercely captivated by a new kind of political royalty: the Kennedy family. First Lady Jackie Kennedy was the ultimate global fashion icon of her era. Millions of women fiercely scrutinized and desperately copied every single outfit she wore in public. And what did the incredibly sophisticated First Lady choose to carry on her arm? A slouchy, incredibly elegant Gucci hobo bag. She loved the comfortable, unstructured design so deeply and wore it so frequently in front of flashing press cameras that the brand made a massive, historically unprecedented decision. They permanently renamed the design the Jackie in her absolute honor. Have you ever heard of a brand renaming their flagship product just because a famous woman liked it? It was a masterful, genius stroke of public relations. The bag violently flew off the shelves, generating millions in pure revenue, and firmly establishing the Italian leather house as the absolute gold standard for American wealth, power, and high society prestige in this very exact moment right now. From the cold, dark scullery of the London Savoy Hotel to the glittering camera-flashing steps of the White House, the journey was absolutely complete. The brand had successfully conquered the entire globe. They boldly expanded into New York, London, Paris, and Beverly Hills, opening wildly luxurious boutiques that catered exclusively to the impossibly rich. The interlocking GG logo was no longer just a clever maker's mark. It was a universally recognized symbol of supreme power and undeniable success. Guccio's wild, terrifying gamble had paid off in ways that completely defied all logical comprehension. He had taken the crippling poverty of his harsh youth and aggressively forged it into an unstoppable billion-dollar dynasty. He successfully proved that luxury was not something you simply inherited. It was something you violently created with your own two hands, against everything the industry said. The legacy of the poor Italian hotel porter was permanently sealed in the glorious history books of high fashion forever. Gucci was worn confidently by royalty, presidents, and movie stars globally. They were completely untouchable. But the biggest threat to the Gucci empire wasn't a rival brand. It was the people sitting at their own dinner table in that exact moment. The founder, Guccio, eventually passed away, leaving his vast, incredibly lucrative empire in the eager, greedy hands of his fiercely ambitious sons. The brilliant patriarch who had masterfully held the fiery family together with his iron will was suddenly gone. Without his strict, visionary guidance, the massive cracks in the family foundation rapidly began to show. The wealth they had amassed was staggering. But extreme wealth mixed with toxic family egos is an incredibly dangerous, highly volatile cocktail. The sons violently disagreed on the future direction of the booming company. They fiercely battled for absolute control over the sprawling global boutiques, the secret leather recipes, and the incredibly valuable brand name itself. The golden era of pure, unified innovation was officially over. A dark, terrifying cloud was rapidly forming over the sunny Florence headquarters. The very name that Guccio had brilliantly created to symbolize supreme elegance was about to become completely synonymous with bitter lawsuits, vicious betrayals, and devastating blood feuds. The empire was balancing dangerously on the absolute edge of a sharp cliff, completely blind to the catastrophic disaster that was rapidly approaching their iconic, perfectly polished front doors in Italy at this very exact moment right now today. The 1980s arrived not with the gentle elegance of a silk scarf, but with the brutal force of a wrecking ball swinging directly into the heart of the historic Florence headquarters. Guccio was gone. leaving behind a massive, incredibly lucrative global empire. But the very bloodline that built this sprawling dynasty was about to completely dismantle it, brick by luxurious brick. Have you ever seen a family tear itself apart over money? It is a vicious, ugly spectacle. Now, imagine that exact same family feud played out on the global stage with billions of dollars and the world's most famous brand name on the line. The sons and grandsons of the brilliant founder descended into a catastrophic, completely toxic civil war. They violently battled for ultimate control in boardrooms, throwing heavy glass ashtrays at each other's heads during screaming matches. They actively reported each other to the federal government for massive tax evasion, desperately trying to lock their own flesh and blood in prison. It was a spectacular, highly publicized collapse of epic proportions. They completely lost sight of the magnificent vision that started it all. In their desperate, greedy scramble for supreme power, they severely diluted the iconic brand. They slapped the sacred interlocking GG logo onto cheap coffee mugs, flimsy plastic lighters, and tacky keychains just to make a quick buck. They went against everything the industry said about maintaining strict exclusivity. The luxury market watched in absolute horror as the definitive symbol of Italian wealth slowly transformed into a cheap, common joke. They were bleeding cash at a terrifying rate, teetering violently on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. How could the absolute gold standard of high fashion fall so dramatically from grace? The answer is a brutal, unforgiving business lesson that every single entrepreneur must learn. Passion builds magnificent empires, but unchecked, rampant ego completely destroys them. The family genuinely believed that sharing the Gucci name automatically gave them the visionary genius of the founder. But Guccio was different. He had earned his sharp instincts through years of agonizing poverty and silent observation at the Savoy Hotel. His spoiled heirs had only ever known extreme, suffocating wealth. They arrogantly believed the brand was an invincible birthright. They were dead wrong. A brand is always bigger than blood. The brutal reality of business is that the market does not care about your sacred family tree. It only cares about flawless execution and relentless innovation. By the early 1990s, the bitter family feud reached a dark, terrifying, and completely irreversible climax. Maurizio Gucci, the last remaining family member to stubbornly hold absolute power over the dying company, was shockingly assassinated on the sunny steps of his private Milan office. He was gunned down in broad daylight by a hitman hired by his former wife. The tragic, bloody murder sent massive shockwaves through the entire fashion world. The family dynasty was officially, violently dead. But something happened that would change everything. The actual company itself was not ready to die. In order to miraculously survive this catastrophic meltdown, the deeply wounded brand had to make a ruthless, extremely painful decision. They had to completely sever ties with the toxic family that had birthed them. They forcibly stripped the last remaining feuding family members of their executive power and permanently locked them out of the historic Florence headquarters. It was a necessary, vital amputation to stop the aggressive corporate infection from completely killing the host. To save the dying empire, you must aggressively separate family pride from corporate strategy. They realized they desperately needed brilliant, visionary outsiders who respected the rich heritage, but were not blinded by the toxic emotional baggage of the bloodline. They brought in cold, highly calculating professional management to aggressively restructure the massive, crippling debt. But financial restructuring alone cannot save a luxury fashion house. You need absolute creative genius to make the wealthy elite desire your products once again. You need someone to forcefully grab the dusty, dying leather shop by the throat and violently drag it kicking and screaming back into the modern cultural zeitgeist. Enter Tom Ford, a completely unknown, fiercely ambitious American designer who possessed the exact same relentless, terrifying hunger that young Guccio once had when he boldly boarded that train from London back to Italy. Tom Ford did not just design clothes, he aggressively engineered absolute desire. He completely rejected the stale, conservative designs of the past decade. Introduced sleek, provocative, flawlessly tailored garments that immediately shocked and seduced the fashion world. He went against everything the industry said a heritage brand should do. He took the dusty, forgotten interlocking keys and made them incredibly dangerous, highly provocative, and undeniably powerful once again. He completely transformed the dying company into a massive, modern, highly relevant global fashion powerhouse. The wealthy elite, who had proudly abandoned the brand during the ugly family feuds, suddenly rushed back to the boutiques, completely mesmerized by this thrilling new vision of unapologetic glamour. The company miraculously pulled itself out of the terrifying jaws of total bankruptcy and soared to unprecedented financial heights. Eventually, the revitalized brand was completely acquired by the massive Kering Group, firmly cementing its untouchable status as a global corporate titan. The brutal, agonizing lessons of the 1980s were permanently etched into the corporate DNA of the company forever. If you want to build a dynasty that lasts for a century, you must ruthlessly protect the core vision at all absolute costs. You must understand that true luxury is an incredibly fragile illusion that can be shattered instantly by internal greed and arrogant complacency. The incredible, miraculous resurrection of the brand proved that while a powerful founding family can spark the initial flame, it requires cold, calculated, professional execution to keep that massive fire burning brightly across generations. The Italian hotel porter's audacious dream had finally survived the ultimate, devastating test of time. Proving greatness is never killed by those who simply do not understand its power. Today, the brand that nearly collapsed under the heavy, suffocating weight of its own immense ego stands completely undefeated. It is a massive, dominating global force boasting over 500 breathtakingly luxurious stores scattered across the wealthiest cities on Earth. Can you even begin to comprehend the staggering financial reality of this empire? It commands an unbelievable valuation north of $18 billion today. But beyond the staggering financial metrics, beyond the dazzling runway shows, and beyond the aggressive corporate acquisitions, lies a profound, deeply inspiring truth. What started as one poor Italian boy's audacious, seemingly impossible dream became the ultimate, undisputed symbol of pure Italian elegance and historic craftsmanship. It is a brilliant, undeniable testament to the relentless visionary spirit of Florence itself. The beautiful city that once offered him absolutely nothing but grinding poverty is now universally defined by his family's legendary name. He went against everything the industry said was possible for a commoner. He took the brutal, stinging humiliation of his youth and weaponized it into a pristine, flawless legacy that completely outlived the very aristocrats he once quietly served. Have you ever looked at a massive mountain and felt completely paralyzed by the terrifying climb? Guccio didn't. Next time you walk past a glittering storefront and see those iconic interlocking G's shining brightly in the glass, do not just see a tremendously expensive bag. Remember the invisible hotel porter. Remember the penniless, exhausted young man standing completely unnoticed in the grand, intimidating lobby of the London Savoy Hotel. He looked at the vast, impossible gap between his own bleak reality and the glittering, untouchable world of the ultra-wealthy elite. And what did he do? He didn't complain. He didn't surrender to his fate. He simply decided to build a magnificent, indestructible bridge out of premium Florentine leather. He risked absolutely everything he had on one terrifying, brilliant gamble. He proved to the entire world that legendary greatness is never simply inherited. It must be violently, obsessively, and relentlessly built from the very scratch. You do not need royal blood to build a lasting dynasty. You only need an uncompromising vision, insider knowledge, and the sheer terrifying audacity to execute it flawlessly. Are you ready to stop quietly observing the elite and finally start building your own massive, unshakable empire from the ground up today? If you want to master the dark art of extreme success, learn how to build your own massive empire and decode the heavily guarded secrets of history's greatest, most ruthless founders. Hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications right now. We drop a brand new, highly detailed masterclass every single week. Join us and build your own legacy today.